Unit 4, Biological Psychology. Presentation 6, Personality Factors and Stress.
Characteristics of Type A and Type B behaviours. In the 1950s, two American cardiologists, Meyer Friedman and Ray Rosenman, first described a pattern of characteristic behaviours as being typical of the Type A personality. The absence of these characteristics was referred to as a Type B personality. First of all, the behaviour of somebody with a Type A personality is characterised by impatience and time urgency. These individuals get frustrated when having to queue. They will interrupt others frequently, even finishing their sentences for them, and they are always aware of the time pressures they are under.
A second characteristic of Type A behaviour is hostility and aggressiveness. The Type A personality tends to be impatient and is often described as having a short fuse. Additional characteristics include competitiveness and a constant drive for achievement. Friedman and Rosenman estimated that as many as 50% of the population display the Type A behaviour pattern.
Friedman and Rosenman believe that the characteristic behaviours associated with the Type A personality would lead to a range of negative health outcomes, including increased job stress, raised blood pressure, and an increase in the levels of stress hormones such as cortisol. All of these are linked to ill health, particularly the development of heart disease.
Type B individuals, on the other hand, tend to be the perfect contrast to those with Type A personalities. They are generally patient, relaxed, easygoing, and are often described as lacking any sense of time urgency. The characteristic behaviours associated with the Type B personality are believed to decrease an individual's risks of negative outcomes such as stress and heart disease.
Research on Type A and Type B behaviour. Friedman and Rosenman carried out a study to see whether people who display Type A behaviour would be more likely to develop heart disease than those whose behaviour would be described as Type B. They used an interview to assess the personality of 3,200 Californian men between the age of 39 and 59. They also assessed the way in which these men responded to everyday pressures. For example, how they might react to having to stand in a slow-moving queue. As a result, each man was classified as either Type A, possessing the typical characteristics of a Type A personality, or Type B, in that they showed none of these characteristics.
Results of this study confirmed Friedman and Rosenman's prediction. 8.5 years after the initial interviews, twice as many of those with the Type A behaviour pattern had died from heart disease than those with the Type B behaviour pattern. The Type A group also had higher blood pressure and higher levels of cholesterol, both indicators of heart disease.
Evaluation of the Type A, Type B behaviour patterns and stress. Despite the findings from the Friedman and Rosenman study, other research has challenged the claim that Type A behaviour is a significant risk factor in the development of heart disease. Ragland and Brand carried out a follow-up study of Friedman and Rosenman's participants 22 years after the start of the original study. They found that of the 3,200 men who had taken part in the study, 15% had died of heart disease. However, they found no relationship between Type A behaviour and death from heart disease. There is an explanation for this discrepancy though, as many of these men had taken preventative measures after the first results were published.
Other research suggests that not all components of the Type A behaviour pattern are linked to heart disease. A meta-analysis of 35 studies carried out by Michael Mertek did find an association between heart disease and Type A behaviour, but this was only true for one component, hostility. There was no evidence of an association between heart disease and other components of the Type A behaviour pattern. This suggests that the key factor in heart disease is hostility rather than a Type A behaviour pattern.
A final critical point is that Type A behaviour does not itself cause heart disease, but rather the Type A person is more likely to put themselves into stressful conditions, leading to earlier incidence of heart disease than is the case for type B individuals. John Gallicus studied 2,400 men aged between 50 and 64 years, all classified as having the type A personality. The men were examined for heart disease at 5-year intervals, as well as being tested for smoking habits, alcohol consumption, and other aspects of lifestyle. Of these men, 7% developed heart disease in the first 5 years, but they were also more likely to be heavy smokers and have high levels of cholesterol, both significant contributory factors in the development of heart disease.
So, let me see if I've got this right. I'm guessing that the behaviour patterns typical of the type A individual makes them more likely to engage in unhealthy behaviours such as smoking and eating fast food.
That's right. Then this increases their cholesterol levels and the risk of heart disease.
It's not hard to see how that would happen. Smoking is often a reaction to stress, and people who are time pressured may resort to takeaways and other foods that increase their cholesterol levels. So it would be this aspect of their lifestyle that leads to an increase in their risk for heart disease, rather than their personality.
Let's now move on to look at our second personality type, the hardy personality. Although type A behaviour is claimed to be a risk factor for heart disease, many type A individuals appear to be resistant to the harmful effects of stress and never develop heart disease. Researchers Suzanne Cabassa and Salvatore Maddi suggested that such people have a hardy personality. Individuals with this type of personality have 3 major characteristics.
The first characteristic is control. Hardy people see themselves as being in control of their lives, rather than being controlled by external factors. How much control we perceive we have over a stressor will determine how difficult the stressor will be for us to cope with, and therefore how much we are likely to be affected by it.
The second characteristic is commitment. Hardy people are more involved with the world around them, be it family, work, community, or whatever. They have a strong sense of purpose, which gives their life a greater meaning.
The third and final characteristic is challenge. People with a hardy personality see life challenges as problems to be overcome, rather than as stressors to be frightened of.
Research on the hardy personality. In 1979, Cabassa studied 800 high-level business executives, assessing their stress levels using Holmes and Ra's Social Readjustment Rating Scale. The participants' hardiness was assessed using a hardiness scale. Some of these executives had low levels of absence through illness, whereas others had high levels of absence through illness. Clearly, something else was modifying the effects of stress because individuals experiencing the same stress levels had different illness records.
After analysing the results of the 2 scales and comparing them to illness records, Cabassa found that those with a low level of absence through illness tended to score high on all 3 characteristics of the hardy personality. Those with a high level of absence through illness tended to score low on all 3 characteristics. This suggests that although both groups had been exposed to similar stressors in their work, executives with low levels of hardiness had perceived the stressors more negatively. As a result, they had been more adversely affected by them.
Other research has also demonstrated the importance of hardiness as a buffer against the negative effects of stress. For example, Maddi and colleagues measured hardiness among employees of a US company that was drastically reducing the size of its workforce. They found that 2/3 of the employees suffered stress-related illness, but the other third thrived. Faced with a very uncertain future, why had this group responded so differently to the other? The answer, of course, was that the group that thrived showed evidence of the 3 components of hardiness. For example, the uncertainty associated with possible redundancy was a challenge to be overcome, not something to be feared.
Evaluating the hardy personality. Some critics have argued that the concept of hardiness can be more simply explained by the notion of negative affectivity. Negative affectivity reflects one's general approach to life. People who are high in negative affectivity dwell more on their failures and on negative aspects of their world. For example, when something bad happens at work, someone high in negative affectivity is likely to brood over it to the exclusion of other more positive experiences. As a result, they experience higher levels of stress and are also more likely to report dissatisfaction and distress.
There are problems associated with measuring the relationship between the hardy personality and stress. Much of the support for this relationship has relied on self-report questionnaires. These are criticised because people have a tendency to exaggerate their symptoms of stress in order to make their work situation seem worse than it actually is. Alternatively, they may underreport the severity of their problems to give the impression that they are coping just fine.
The original 53-item hardiness scale devised by Kobasa and Maddy has also been criticised for including too many redundant items. A newer 15-item scale to replace this scale was devised by Paul Bartone. This was successfully used to predict negative health outcomes, such as the likelihood of depression or post-traumatic stress disorder when a person is placed in a stressful situation. The scale was successfully used with a large group of men and women US Army reservists mobilized for the Gulf War. Applicants for US Special Forces, such as the US Navy SEALs, are now routinely screened for hardiness using this scale because of its ability to predict how potential recruits will respond to the stresses of combat.
In conclusion, we can say that some personality characteristics make us more vulnerable to the negative effects of stress, while others make us more resistant. The fact that different people can experience the same stresses, yet only some experience these stresses as stressful, suggests that personality characteristics such as Type A and the hardy personality mediate in the relationship between stress and illness.